The wind howled like 1,000 angry wolves, as Jack Sullivan pulled his coat tighter around his broad shoulders, squinting through the white curtain of snow that had transformed the Montana landscape into an unforgiving wasteland. It was December of 1883, and he had seen his share of blizzards in his 26 years, but this one came upon him with a fury that even seasoned cowboys feared. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Daisy, plodded forward with determination, her breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. Jack had been riding for 3 days from Boise, Idaho, delivering a message to a ranch owner near Helena, and now he was paying the price for pushing through when he should have waited out the storm. The temperature had dropped so low that his fingers ached even through his leather gloves, and ice clung to his dark beard. He knew he needed to find shelter soon or risk freezing to death in this God-forsaken wilderness. The trail had disappeared beneath a blanket of white, and visibility had reduced to mere feet ahead. Jack relied on Daisy's instincts as much as his own, trusting the mare to find safe footing on the treacherous path. Then Daisy suddenly stopped, her ears pricking forward despite the wind. Jack strained to hear what had caught her attention, but the storm swallowed most sounds. He urged the horse forward slowly, and that was when he saw it, a dark shape against the white ground, barely visible through the swirling snow. His heart lurched as he realized it was a person, huddled beneath what appeared to be an overturned wagon. Jack dismounted quickly, his boots sinking into the deep snow as he rushed toward the figure. As he drew closer, he could see it was a woman, her body curled in on itself, her dark hair caked with ice and snow. She wore a thin coat that was wholly inadequate for this weather, and her lips had taken on a frightening blue tinge. "Madam," he called out, kneeling beside her and shaking her shoulder gently. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing striking green eyes that seemed unfocused. She looked up at him with an expression that broke his heart, a mixture of resignation and despair. "Leave me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Just leave me here. I am already dead." "Never," Jack said firmly, his jaw set with determination. "I am not leaving anyone to die in this storm. Can you stand?" She shook her head weakly. "Too cold, cannot feel my legs." "You will die too if you stay. Please, just go." Jack ignored her protests and began assessing her condition. Her hands were like ice, and when he checked her feet, he found her boots were soaked through, offering no protection against the elements. He knew hypothermia when he saw it, and this woman was dangerously close to death. "My name is Jack Sullivan, and I am getting you out of here," he said, already removing his own heavy coat and wrapping it around her shivering frame. "What is your name?" "Victoria," she managed through chattering teeth. "Victoria Jensen, but it does not matter, I am finished." "Well, Miss Jensen, I have got news for you. You are not finished, not while I have got breath in my body." Jack looked around quickly, his mind racing. The overturned wagon offered minimal shelter, but it was better than nothing. He could see the remains of a horse in the traces, clearly dead from the cold or injury. "What happened here?" "Wagon wheel broke," Victoria said, her words slurring slightly. "Horse panicked. Storm came so fast. I tried to walk, but I could not find the road. Came back here. That was yesterday, I think. Maybe longer. Time is strange now." Jack made a quick decision. There was a lined shack he had passed about a mile back, one of those small cabins that ranchers maintained for winter emergencies. He had noted its location carefully before the storm worsened. Getting Victoria there was their only chance. "I am going to lift you onto my horse," he said, standing and brushing snow from his pants. "It will not be comfortable, but we need to get to shelter." "You should leave me," she repeated, but her protest was weaker now, her body shutting down from the cold. "I said never, and I meant it." Jack scooped her into his arms, surprised at how light she felt. She was a small woman, probably no more than 5 feet 4 inches tall, with delicate features that spoke of refinement rather than frontier hardship. He wondered what she was doing out here alone, but questions could wait until they were both safe and warm. Getting Victoria onto Daisy proved challenging as the wind threatened to knock them both over, but Jack managed to position her in the saddle before climbing up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her to keep her from falling, pulling her back against his chest. Even through the layers of clothing, he could feel how violently she was shivering. "Hold on," he murmured into her ear. "Just hold on a little longer." The ride to the line shack was the longest mile of Jack's life. The wind seemed determined to push them off course, and the snow fell so thickly that he could barely see Daisy's ears in front of him. He kept Victoria talking, asking her questions to keep her conscious, though her answers became increasingly incoherent. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Boston," she mumbled. "Came west 6 months ago. Stupid, so stupid." "Why did you come west?" "Aunt died. Left me a house in Helena. Thought I could start over. Bad marriage. Wanted to escape." Her words ran together, and Jack felt a surge of fear that she was slipping away. "Tell me about Boston," he urged. "What did you do there?" "Taught school. Piano lessons. Proper young lady." She laughed, a sound without humor. "Not proper enough for my husband. He had other women. Many other women. Divorce is scandalous, but I did not care anymore." Jack felt a flash of anger toward the unknown man who had hurt her, but he pushed it aside. "You are going to be fine, Victoria. We are almost there." When the line shack finally appeared through the white veil of snow, Jack could have wept with relief. It was a small structure, barely more than a shed, but it had 4 walls and a roof. He dismounted carefully, then lifted Victoria down, cradling her against his chest as he kicked open the door. Inside, the cabin was dark and bitterly cold, but it was out of the wind. Jack laid Victoria on the single cot against the wall, then rushed to get a fire started in the small stove. His hands shook from cold and urgency as he stuffed kindling and precious scraps of wood into the stove, striking his flint repeatedly until a spark caught. The fire seemed to take forever to grow, but eventually flames began to lick at the larger pieces of wood. While the fire built, Jack turned his attention back to Victoria. She had stopped shivering, which he knew was a very bad sign. Her skin had taken on a waxy appearance, and her breathing was shallow. He had to warm her core temperature quickly, or she would die. Jack had learned about cold exposure from an old trapper years ago, and he knew what needed to be done. He removed Victoria's wet boots and stockings, her frozen coat and dress, working quickly but carefully. Her undergarments were damp with melted snow, and he removed those too, trying to maintain some sense of propriety by wrapping her immediately in the 2 wool blankets he found in the cabin's small trunk. But he knew blankets alone would not be enough. With grim determination, Jack removed his own wet outer clothing, down to his union suit, and climbed onto the narrow cot beside Victoria. He pulled her cold body against his, wrapping the blankets around them both and using his own body heat to warm her. It was not improper if it saved her life, he told himself. Though he knew what people would say if they knew. For long minutes, he held her, rubbing her arms and back, willing warmth back into her body. The fire began to heat the small space, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, he felt Victoria begin to respond. First came the shivering again, violent tremors that shook her entire frame. Jack held her tighter, murmuring reassurances. "That is good," he said softly. "Shivering is good. It means your body is fighting." Victoria's eyes opened, and for the first time they seemed to truly focus on him. Awareness flooded her features, followed by confusion, then mortification as she realized their state of undress. Where? She stammered, trying to pull away. Do not move, Jack said firmly but gently. You were dying from the cold. I had to warm you. This is a lined shack about a mile from where I found you. You are safe now. Victoria stopped struggling, though color rose in her pale cheeks. You should have left me, she said, but there was less conviction in her voice now. I told you. Never. And I always keep my word. Jack shifted slightly to look at her face. In the growing firelight, he could see her more clearly. She was beautiful, he realized, with high cheekbones and full lips. Her dark hair hung in damp tangles around her face, and those green eyes held depths of sadness that made his chest ache. How do you feel? Cold, she admitted. But less cold than before. My fingers and toes hurt. That is good. Pain means blood is flowing again. Jack carefully took her hands in his, examining them. You have some frostbite on your fingers, but I do not think it is too severe. Your toes will need checking too, once you are warmer. They lay like that for a while, the awkwardness of the situation gradually giving way to something else. Jack was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the soft sound of her breathing, of the way her hair smelled faintly of lavender despite everything she had been through. Why did you stop? Victoria asked quietly. Most men would have ridden past. Jack was silent for a moment, considering the question. My mother raised me to help people who need it. She always said that we are measured not by what we do when eyes are watching, but by what we do when nobody would ever know. Besides, I could not live with myself if I had left you to die. You risked your own life. Maybe. But some risks are worth taking. He paused. Tell me what happened. Why were you traveling alone in winter? Victoria sighed, and he felt the exhale against his chest. I received word that my aunt's house in Helena was being contested by a distant cousin. I needed to get there to meet with a lawyer to prove my claim. I hired a driver and a wagon in Boise, but he took my money and abandoned me at a trading post 2 days ago. I was foolish enough to try to continue alone. I had directions and the weather seemed clear. Then the storm came. That driver should be horsewhipped, Jack said, his voice tight with anger. Taking a woman's money and leaving her stranded, that is lower than low. I should have known better. My husband always said I was too trusting, too naive. There was bitterness in her voice. Perhaps he was right. Your husband was a fool, Jack said bluntly. Any man who would betray a woman like you does not deserve the title of man. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You do not know me. I might be terrible. Despite the seriousness of their situation, Jack found himself smiling. Are you terrible? I have been told I am too outspoken, too independent. I read books about science and philosophy, which apparently is unbecoming in a woman. I refuse to pretend ignorance to make my husband feel superior. So yes, perhaps I am terrible. Then I must have a fondness for terrible women, Jack said, and was rewarded with a small laugh from Victoria. You are a strange cowboy, Jack Sullivan. I am a rancher, actually. Or I was. I have been working as a courier and guide while I save money to buy my own spread. Been dreaming of a place in the valley near Boise for years now. You have family there, Jack's expression sobered. Had. My mother died 3 years ago, fever. My father passed when I was 15, thrown from a horse. I have been on my own since then, mostly. I am sorry, Victoria said softly, and he could hear genuine sympathy in her voice. That must have been very hard. It was. But it made me strong, made me independent. He shifted slightly, making sure the blankets were still secure around them. What about you? Any family besides the aunt who left you the house? No. My parents died when I was young, cholera. My aunt raised me, my father's sister. She was strict but kind. She moved west 5 years ago for her health. The dry air was supposed to help her lungs. I suppose it did. She lived longer than the doctors predicted. But I had already married by then, so I stayed in Boston. I wish now I had come with her. What made you finally decide to come west after she died? Victoria was quiet for so long that Jack thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I caught my husband in our bed with my best friend, or the woman I thought was my best friend. That was the final betrayal. I could endure the others, the gambling debts I paid with my inheritance, the constant criticism, the way he made me feel small and worthless. But that day, something broke inside me. I filed for divorce the next morning, scandal be damned. When I received word of my aunt's death and the inheritance, it felt like a sign, a chance to start completely over. Jack felt a fierce protectiveness rise in him, a desire to find this unknown husband and teach him a lesson about how to treat a woman, but he kept his voice calm. You are brave. Starting over in a new place that takes courage. Or desperation, Victoria said with a sad laugh. I am not sure which. Does it matter? You are here now. You survived. Jack paused, then added quietly, we survived. The fire crackled in the stove, and outside the wind continued to howl. But inside the small line shack, warmth was slowly spreading. Jack could feel Victoria's body temperature rising, the dangerous chill receding. Her shivering had subsided to occasional tremors, and color was returning to her face. As the immediate crisis passed, Jack became aware of the intimacy of their position in a different way. The press of her body against his was no longer just about survival, it was about connection, about the strange pull he felt toward this woman he had known for less than an hour. He had held women before, but never like this, never with this sense of rightness that both comforted and unsettled him. You should rest, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. You have been through an ordeal. Sleep will help. Will you stay? Victoria asked, and he heard a vulnerability in her question that made his heart clench. I am not going anywhere, Jack promised. I will keep the fire going and watch over you. You are safe now. Victoria's eyes drifted closed, and within minutes, her breathing deepened into sleep. Jack continued to hold her, unwilling to move and risk waking her. He watched the play of firelight across her face, the way her dark lashes rested against her cheeks, the slight part of her lips as she breathed. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was something about her that called to him, something that made him want to protect her, to make her smile, to chase away the sadness he saw in her eyes. Jack had never been a man who believed in fate or destiny. He was practical, grounded in the reality of hard work and perseverance. But holding Victoria in his arms as the storm raged outside, he could not shake the feeling that finding her had changed something fundamental in his life. That this moment, this storm, this woman, were all part of something larger than himself. He must have dozed off eventually because he woke to find pale light filtering through the gaps in the cabin's walls. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie silence. Victoria still slept in his arms, her breathing steady and strong. Relief flooded through him. She had made it through the night. Jack carefully extricated himself from the cot, tucking the blankets around Victoria to keep her warm. The fire had burned low, and he added more wood from the small stack beside the stove. His own clothes had dried somewhat overnight, hanging near the fire where he had placed them before sleeping. He dressed quickly, trying not to wake Victoria. Outside, the world had been transformed into a landscape of white. Snow reached nearly to the cabin's windows, and the sun reflecting off the pristine surface was blindingly bright. Jack checked on Daisy, who had wisely found shelter against the cabin's lee side. He brushed snow off her back and gave her some oats from the small store in the cabin. When he returned inside, Victoria was awake, sitting up on the cot with the blankets wrapped around her. Her hair was a wild tangle, and her eyes were puffy from sleep, but she looked infinitely better than she had the night before. "Good morning," Jack said, closing the door against the cold. "How do you feel?" "Like I was frozen and thawed," Victoria said, attempting a smile. "Everything hurts, but I am alive, which I did not expect to be, thanks to you." Jack felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Victoria said firmly. "You did what a good man would do." "There is a difference." She looked down at the blankets, then back up at him. "I do not have any dry clothes, do I? Your things are still damp. I can hang them closer to the fire, but it will take time." Jack moved to the small trunk and pulled out a worn shirt and pants. "These will be too big, but they are clean and dry. You can wear them while your clothes finish drying." Victoria took the garments with a grateful smile. "Would you mind stepping outside for a moment?" "Of course." Jack grabbed his coat and went back outside, giving her privacy to dress. He stood in the snow, breathing in the crisp, clean air, and tried to organize his thoughts. The storm had passed, which meant he could get Victoria to Helena. He could deliver her to safety, make sure she was cared for, and then continue on his way. That was the sensible thing to do. But the thought of leaving her made his chest tight with an emotion he could not quite name. When Victoria called that she was dressed, Jack returned to find her swimming in his oversized clothes. She had rolled up the sleeves and pant legs and cinched the waist with a piece of rope, but she still looked like a child playing dress-up. Despite himself, Jack smiled. "What?" Victoria asked, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "Nothing. You look fine." He busied himself with pulling some supplies from the cabin store's hardtack, dried beef and coffee. "Are you hungry?" "Starving," Victoria admitted. She moved to the small table, settling into one of the two chairs. "I cannot remember when I last ate. Before the storm, certainly." Jack set about making coffee and preparing what food they had. As he worked, he was aware of Victoria watching him. When he finally sat down across from her, handing her a cup of strong, black coffee and a plate of food, she studied him with an intensity that made him self-conscious. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am trying to understand you," Victoria said honestly. "Men like you are not common in my experience. Men who make coffee," she smiled. "Men who risk their lives for strangers. Men who speak respectfully and keep their word. You are an enigma, Jack Sullivan." "I am just a man trying to do right," Jack said, uncomfortable with her praise. "Nothing special." "You are wrong," Victoria said softly, "but I will not argue with you." She sipped her coffee, wincing at the strength. "What happens now? The storm has passed." "The snow will make travel difficult but not impossible. I will take you to Helena. Make sure you get to safety. And then I will complete my delivery and head back to Boise." Jack did not mention how much the thought bothered him. Victoria nodded slowly. "Of course. You have your own life, your own plans. I have already imposed enough." "It is not an imposition," Jack said quickly. "I want to make sure you are safe." They ate in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Jack found himself memorizing details about Victoria, the way she held her coffee cup with both hands, the small scar above her right eyebrow, the thoughtful expression she wore when she was thinking. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him. After breakfast, they set about preparing for the journey. Victoria's clothes were still too damp to wear comfortably, so she kept his oversized outfit. Jack fashioned a warmer wrap from one of the blankets, draping it around her shoulders. As his hands brushed her neck, securing the blanket, he felt her shiver, but not from cold this time. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, electric and undeniable. Jack stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "That should keep you warmer." "Thank you," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. The ride to Helena was slow going. Daisy struggled through the deep snow, and Jack had to dismount several times to test the footing ahead. Victoria rode in front of him, and he kept his arms around her, telling himself it was only to keep her safe and warm. But he was acutely aware of every point of contact, every breath she took, every time she leaned back against him. They did not talk much during the ride. The landscape required Jack's full attention, and Victoria seemed content to simply be. But the silence between them was comfortable, easy in a way that surprised Jack. He had always been a solitary man, more at ease with horses and wide open spaces than with people. But with Victoria, the quiet felt natural, like they had been riding together for years rather than hours. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, Helena came into view. It was a bustling town, grown rich from gold strikes in the nearby mountains. The main street was lined with brick buildings, a testament to the wealth that flowed through the community. Even with snow covering everything, the town hummed with activity: miners and merchants, cowboys and shopkeepers, all going about their business. Jack guided Daisy toward a respectable-looking boarding house he knew from previous trips. The proprietor, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Harriet Green, came out to meet them as they approached. "Jack Sullivan," she said, her expression softening slightly. "I did not expect to see you in this weather, and with a companion no less." "Mrs. Green," Jack said, dismounting and helping Victoria down. "This is Miss Victoria Jensen. She was caught in the storm. I need a room for her, somewhere safe and warm." Mrs. Green's sharp eyes took in Victoria's oversized clothes and disheveled appearance, but to her credit, she did not ask intrusive questions. "Come inside, dear. You look frozen through. I will draw you a hot bath and get you some proper clothing." Victoria turned to Jack, her green eyes wide. "Will you come inside?" "I need to see to my horse," Jack said, though what he really needed was distance, a chance to clear his head and understand the confused feelings swirling in his chest. "I will come by later to check on you. Make sure you have everything you need." "Jack," Victoria reached out, touching his arm. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life." "I am glad I was there," Jack said simply. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he added, "I will see you soon." As Mrs. Green led Victoria inside, Jack stood in the snowy street, watching until the door closed behind them. Then he led Daisy to the stable, his mind racing with thoughts he could not organize. He had done what he set out to do. He had saved Victoria from the storm, brought her to safety. His duty was complete. He should feel satisfied, ready to move on. Instead, he felt hollow, like he had left something important behind in that boarding house. Jack spent the next hour caring for Daisy, brushing her down and making sure she had plenty of feed and water. The stable hand, a young man named Tom, watched him with curious eyes. "That woman you brought in," Tom said casually. "She your wife?" "No," Jack said, perhaps too quickly. "Just someone I found in the storm." "Pretty thing," Tom observed. "If she ain't spoken for, there will be plenty of men lining up to court her. Rich widow women do not stay single long in Helena." Jack felt an unexpected surge of jealousy at the thought of other men pursuing Victoria. He had no claim on her, no right to feel possessive. But the feeling was there nonetheless, hot and uncomfortable in his chest. After leaving the stable, Jack wandered the streets of Helena, trying to think. He still had to complete his delivery. The message he carried was time-sensitive. But the rancher he was supposed to meet lived on the outskirts of town, and with the roads in their current condition, reaching him would take at least a day's ride. Jack could stay in Helena tonight, check on Victoria in the morning, and then head out to complete his job. The thought of seeing her again made his heart beat faster. Jack found a saloon and ordered a whiskey, sitting in a corner where he could watch the room. The place was crowded with men seeking warmth and companionship after being cooped up during the storm. Conversations swirled around him, talk of mining claims and cattle prices, complaints about the weather and speculation about spring. "You hear about that wagon they found overturned on the trail?" a grizzled miner said to his companion. "Dead horse still in the traces. Sheriff figures whoever was driving it froze to death somewhere." "Fool thing, traveling in winter," the companion replied. "Probably some greenhorn who did not know better." Jack kept his mouth shut, not wanting to draw attention. Victoria's wagon would be found eventually, but there was no need to volunteer information. She was safe now, and that was what mattered. He finished his drink and made his way back to the boarding house. Mrs. Green answered his knock, her expression knowing. "Miss Jensen is in the parlor," she said. "Been asking about you for the past hour." Jack found Victoria sitting by the fireplace, transformed from the half-frozen woman he had found in the snow. She wore a proper dress now, dark blue with a high collar, and her hair was clean and pinned up in a simple but elegant style. She looked like a lady again, refined and beautiful, and Jack was suddenly aware of his own rough appearance, his worn clothes and weathered face, the dirt under his fingernails and the stubble on his jaw. But when Victoria saw him, her face lit up with a smile so genuine that his self-consciousness melted away. "Jack," she said, standing quickly, "I was worried you would not come back." "I said I would," Jack reminded her, moving into the room. "How are you feeling?" "Much better. Mrs. Green has been wonderful. She drew me a bath and lent me this dress. She even sent for a doctor to check me over." Victoria held up her hands, showing fingers that were slightly red but otherwise healthy. "He said I was very lucky. A few more hours in the cold and I might have lost fingers or toes. But thanks to you, I will be fine." "I am glad to hear it." Jack stood awkwardly, hat in his hands, unsure what to say now that the crisis had passed. "Did you contact your lawyer about your aunt's house?" "I sent a message. He will meet with me tomorrow afternoon." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her. "Please sit. Tell me about your delivery. Is it urgent?" Jack sat, grateful for a concrete topic. "Somewhat. I am carrying a message about a land dispute. The rancher I need to see lives about a day's ride from here. With the roads like they are, I will probably head out in the morning, try to reach him by nightfall. So you will be leaving Helena soon." Victoria's voice was carefully neutral, but Jack could see disappointment in her eyes. "I have to complete the job. But I will make sure you are settled first, that you have everything you need." "I have everything I need," Victoria said. "Money, a place to stay, a lawyer to help with the property dispute. You do not need to worry about me." But Jack found that he wanted to worry about her. He wanted to know that she was safe, that she was happy, that she was not alone in this rough frontier town. The intensity of his feelings after knowing her for barely a day should have frightened him. Instead, it felt natural, like something that had always been waiting inside him to wake up. "Victoria," he said, leaning forward, "I know we just met. I know this is going to sound strange, but I cannot shake the feeling that finding you in that storm was not just chance. That maybe it was meant to be," Victoria finished softly. "I have been thinking the same thing. Which is foolish, I know. I do not believe in fate or divine intervention. I believe in making choices and living with consequences. But you saved my life, Jack, and in doing so, you gave me a second chance. I cannot help but think that means something." Jack reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were warm now, alive, and they curled naturally around his palm. "I do not want to leave you," he admitted, "but I have obligations, a reputation to maintain. If I do not complete this delivery, I will not get more work." "I understand," Victoria said. "You have your own life. I cannot ask you to change your plans for a woman you barely know." "What if I want to change them?" The words were out before Jack could stop them. "What if I want to get to know you better, to see where this goes?" Victoria's breath caught. "You do not know anything about me." "Not really. I could be terrible at keeping house. I could be terrible at cooking. I have a temper and I hold grudges and I talk too much when I am nervous." "You are talking too much right now," Jack said with a smile, "and I do not care about any of that. I know that you are brave, that you faced terrible circumstances and survived, that you are willing to start over in a strange place to fight for what is yours. I know that when I hold you, everything feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. "I do not want to be a burden to you. You have dreams, your own ranch, your own life. I will not be the woman who holds you back." "What if you are the woman who makes those dreams better?" Jack squeezed her hand. "What if instead of one person struggling alone, we could build something together?" "We have known each other for one day," Victoria said, but her voice held hope rather than protest. "I know. And maybe I am crazy. Maybe tomorrow I will realize this is all just the emotion of the moment. But Victoria, I do not think so. I think you are someone special. Someone worth taking a chance on." They sat like that, hands clasped, gazing at each other across the firelight. Mrs. Green cleared her throat from the doorway, breaking the moment. "I hate to interrupt," she said, "but I need to close up the parlor for the night. Mr. Sullivan, you are welcome to take a room here if you need one." Jack stood, reluctant to let go of Victoria's hand but knowing propriety demanded it. "Thank you, Mrs. Green. I would appreciate that." As they walked upstairs together, Mrs. Green between them like a proper chaperone, Jack caught Victoria's eye and saw his own feelings reflected there, hope mixed with uncertainty, attraction tempered by caution, and underneath it all, the beginning of something that felt like love. That night, lying in his narrow bed in the room next to Victoria's, Jack stared at the ceiling and tried to think rationally about his situation. He had saved a woman from a blizzard. That was good. But now he was developing feelings for her, deep feelings, after knowing her for barely a day. That was potentially foolish. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw Victoria's face. He felt the weight of her in his arms, heard her voice saying his name. He remembered the way she looked at him, like he was something more than just a cowboy doing his job, like he mattered. Jack had been alone for a long time. After his mother died, he had thrown himself into work, into saving money, into the dream of his own ranch. He had not let himself think about companionship, about love, about building a life with someone. It seemed like a luxury he could not afford. But maybe he had been wrong. Maybe the life he wanted was not just about land and cattle. Maybe it was about finding someone to share it with. The next morning, Jack woke with his mind made up. He would complete his delivery, his word was his bond, and he would not break it. But he would do it as quickly as possible, and then he would come back to Helena. He would come back to Victoria. He found her at breakfast in the boarding house dining room, looking lovely in another borrowed dress. She smiled when she saw him, and Jack felt his heart do a strange flip in his chest. "Good morning," she said. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," Jack lied. He had tossed and turned most of the night. "I need to head out soon, complete my delivery, but I wanted to see you first." Victoria's smile dimmed slightly. "Of course. Your work is important." Jack sat down across from her, lowering his voice so the other boarders would not overhear. "I am coming back. In 3 days, 4 at most. I will complete this job, collect my payment, and then I am coming back to Helena." "If you want me to, that is." Hope blazed in Victoria's eyes. "You would do that, I told you. I do not want to leave you, and I keep my promises." Jack reached across the table, taking her hand despite the impropriety. "Will you wait for me? Will you give us a chance?" "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "Yes, I will wait." They talked through breakfast, making plans. Victoria would meet with her lawyer, try to secure the inheritance her aunt had left her. Jack would complete his delivery and return as quickly as the weather allowed. Neither of them spoke about what would happen after that, but the possibilities hung in the air between them, sweet and terrifying. When it was time for Jack to leave, Victoria walked him out to the stable. The morning was cold but clear, and the snow glittered in the sunlight like diamonds scattered across the earth. "Be careful," Victoria said, helping him secure his supplies to Daisy's saddle. "The roads will still be dangerous." "I will be careful," Jack promised. "You be careful too. This is a rough town. Stay close to the boarding house." "I will." Victoria hesitated, then stepped closer. "Jack, I want you to know that what you did for me, saving my life, it changed everything. I came west running from my old life. But maybe I was running toward something too, toward you." Jack cupped her face in his hand, his rough palm gentle against her smooth cheek. "I feel the same way, like everything in my life was leading to that moment in the storm, to finding you." He wanted to kiss her. The desire was so strong it was almost painful. But there were people around, and Victoria deserved better than a rushed kiss in a stable yard. So instead, he pressed his forehead to hers, breathing in her scent, memorizing the feel of her skin under his hand. "3 days," he whispered. "4 at most. Wait for me." "I will wait," Victoria promised. "However long it takes." Pulling away from her was one of the hardest things Jack had ever done. But he mounted Daisy and turned the mare toward the trail, looking back one last time to see Victoria standing in the snow, her hand raised in farewell. Then he urged Daisy forward, into the wilderness, carrying the image of Victoria in his heart. The ride to the ranch was treacherous. Snow drifts blocked portions of the trail, forcing Jack to take long detours. In several places, he had to dismount and lead Daisy carefully around dangerous spots where the storm had washed out the path. What should have been a day's ride stretched into 2, and Jack spent a cold, miserable night huddled under an outcropping of rock, too anxious to sleep properly. When he finally reached the ranch, exhausted and covered in trail dust, the rancher he sought was surprised to see him. "Jack Sullivan," Thomas Mercer said, stepping out onto his porch. "I did not expect my message to be delivered for weeks, not with that storm. You must have left before it hit." "Got caught in it," Jack said, dismounting stiffly. "But I gave my word the message would reach you promptly." Mercer was a tall man in his 50s, weathered by years of hard work but still strong. He invited Jack inside, where his wife served hot coffee and stew, while Jack delivered the message about disputed water rights from Mercer's neighbor. They talked business for an hour, and when Jack finally stood to leave, Mercer pressed payment into his hand, gold coins that jingled pleasantly in Jack's pocket. "You look exhausted, son," Mercer said. "Stay the night. Rest up before heading back." Every fiber of Jack's being wanted to refuse, to push on immediately back to Helena and Victoria. But he was practical enough to know that exhaustion made for mistakes, and mistakes in winter could be fatal. Reluctantly, he accepted the offer. That night, sitting by the Mercers' fireplace, Jack found himself telling them about Victoria. He had not meant to, but Mrs. Mercer was a kind woman with gentle questions, and before he knew it, the whole story was spilling out, finding Victoria in the snow, the night in the line shack, the feelings he was developing for her. "Sounds like love to me," Mrs. Mercer said with a knowing smile. "When you know, you know." "I knew I would marry Thomas the day I met him. We were married 3 weeks later. That was 28 years ago. 3 weeks?" Jack asked, startled. Sometimes it does not take long, Thomas said, putting his arm around his wife. When it is right, it is right. The question is not how long you have known each other. The question is whether you can imagine your life without her. Jack thought about it. Could he imagine his life without Victoria? The answer came swift and certain. No. In just one day, she had become essential to him. The thought of never seeing her again, of not knowing how her meeting with the lawyer went, of not being there to help her build a new life was unbearable. I cannot, he said simply. I cannot imagine my life without her. Then you have your answer, Mrs. Mercer said. Now the question is what you are going to do about it. Jack left the Mercer ranch at first light, pushing Daisy as hard as he dared through the snow. The return trip took a day and a half, and by the time Helena came into view, 3 days had passed since he left Victoria. He was filthy, exhausted, and had never been more eager to reach a destination in his life. He went straight to the boarding house, not even stopping to stable Daisy first. Mrs. Green opened the door, and her expression told him something was wrong before she even spoke. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice tight. "Thank goodness you are back. Miss Jensen needs you." Jack's heart lurched. What happened? Is she hurt? Not hurt, but in trouble. That cousin she mentioned, the one disputing the inheritance. He arrived in town yesterday with his lawyer. Turned out the cousin is some kind of gambler and con man. He has been claiming Miss Jensen is an impostor, that she has no right to the property. He even produced witnesses who say they never heard of any Victoria Jensen. "That is ridiculous," Jack said, anger flaring. "Where is she?" "At the lawyer's office. The hearing is happening right now. She asked for you, Jack, asked if you had come back." Jack did not wait to hear more. He ran through the streets of Helena, his boots slipping on the packed snow until he reached the lawyer's office. Inside, he found Victoria sitting in a chair, her face pale but composed. Across from her sat a man in an expensive suit, his oily smile making Jack's fists clench. This had to be the cousin. Victoria's eyes widened when she saw Jack, relief flooding her features. "Jack, you came back." "I told you I would." Jack moved to her side and she stood, grasping his hand like a lifeline. "What is going on here?" The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, cleared his throat. "Mr. Sullivan, I presume? I am Benjamin Hayes, attorney for the late Mrs. Margaret Jensen's estate. This is Robert Curtis, who claims to be Mrs. Jensen's nephew and rightful heir to her property." "I do not claim to be her nephew," Curtis said smoothly. "I am her nephew. My mother was Margaret's sister." "This woman," he gestured dismissively at Victoria, "appeared out of nowhere with a story about being a niece. But I have witnesses who say Margaret never mentioned any Victoria Jensen." "My father was Margaret's brother," Victoria said, her voice shaking but determined. "She raised me after my parents died. She moved west before I could join her, but we corresponded regularly. I have her letters." "Letters can be forged," Curtis said with a shrug. "I have witnesses, real people who knew my aunt and never heard her speak of you." Jack studied Curtis, taking in his slicked back hair, his manicured nails, the expensive watch chain across his vest. This was a man who lived by deception, who saw other people as marks to be exploited, and he was trying to steal from Victoria. "What proof do you have of your relationship?" Jack asked Curtis directly. Curtis's smile thinned. "I do not have to prove anything to you, Cowboy. This is a legal matter." "Mr. Sullivan has a point," the lawyer said. "Mr. Curtis, you have provided verbal testimony and witnesses, but I have not seen any documentation proving your kinship to Mrs. Jensen." "I have my mother's family Bible," Curtis said. "It is at my hotel. I can produce it." "Then I suggest you do so," the lawyer said. "And Miss Jensen, if you have those letters from your aunt, they would strengthen your claim considerably." Victoria's face fell. They were in my wagon. When it overturned, I lost everything. My belongings, my papers, all of my aunt's letters. Curtis's smile widened. How convenient. Jack felt Victoria's hand tremble in his, felt her hope draining away, but something did not sit right with him. "Mr. Hayes," he said to the lawyer, "surely there are other ways to prove identity. People in town who knew Margaret Jensen, who might have known about her niece in Boston." "My witnesses say she never mentioned any niece," Curtis interjected. "Who are your witnesses?" Jack demanded. Curtis rattled off 3 names, and Jack recognized 2 of them known drifters and petty criminals. The third was a saloon girl with a reputation for saying anything for money. It was clear what Curtis had done. He had heard about the inheritance, concocted a claim, and bribed witnesses to support his story, but proving that would be another matter. "I want to speak to people who actually knew Margaret Jensen," Jack said. "Longtime residents, the minister at her church, her neighbors, someone who is not on Curtis's payroll." Curtis stood abruptly. "I do not have to sit here and be insulted by some drifter. Mr. Hayes, I expect you to rule on this matter promptly. My claim is clearly superior." "I will make my determination when I have reviewed all the evidence," Hayes said calmly. "Both of you will need to return tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I suggest you each prepare your best case." After Curtis left, still smirking, Victoria sank back into her chair. "It is hopeless. I have no proof. No letters, no witnesses, just my word against his lies." "It is not hopeless," Jack said firmly. He crouched in front of her, taking both her hands. "We will find proof. There has to be someone in this town who knew your aunt, who knew about you. Jack, you do not have to do this. This is not your problem." "Yes, it is, because it matters to you and you matter to me." Jack stood, pulling her to her feet. "Come on. We are going to find people who knew Margaret Jensen, real people, honest people, and we are going to get you your inheritance." They spent the rest of the day canvassing Helena. Jack's direct, honest manner and Victoria's sincere story opened doors. They found the minister at Margaret's church, Reverend William Stone, who remembered Victoria's aunt well. "Margaret spoke of her niece often," the elderly reverend said, sitting in his small office. "Victoria in Boston, she would say, the daughter she never had. She was saving money to bring the girl west, but then she fell ill." "Would you be willing to testify to that?" Jack asked. "Of course." "Margaret was a godly woman. I will not see her memory besmirched by that Curtis fellow. I heard he has been in town for a week, spreading lies and bribery." They found 2 of Margaret's neighbors, women who had visited with her regularly. Both remembered her speaking of Victoria, of letters she received from Boston, of her hope that her niece would join her someday. By evening, they had collected 5 people willing to testify on Victoria's behalf, all long-standing members of the community with solid reputations. It was not perfect proof, but it was something. As they walked back to the boarding house, Victoria leaned against Jack's arm, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "I do not know how to thank you," she said softly. "You have done so much for me already, and now this." "You do not need to thank me," Jack said. "This is what you do for people you care about. You stand by them. You fight for them." Victoria stopped walking, turning to face him in the middle of the snowy street. "Jack Sullivan, I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the cold air between them. Jack felt his heart hammering in his chest, felt the rightness of this moment, of this woman, of everything they had been through together. "Victoria Jensen," he said, cupping her face in his hands, "I think I fell in love with you the moment I saw you in that snow. I just did not know it yet." This time he did kiss her. Gently at first, a soft press of lips that tasted of cold air and coffee and something sweeter that was uniquely Victoria. She made a small sound in the back of her throat and wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back with a fervor that set his blood on fire. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "I am not a rich man. I do not have much to offer, but I will work hard. I will build us a good life, if you will have me." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Victoria whispered. "I am asking you to give me a chance to prove I can make you happy, to show you that what we have is real and lasting." Jack pulled back to look into her eyes. "But yes, eventually, I am asking you to marry me, if you will." "Yes," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes to all of it. To giving you a chance, to building a life together, to marrying you when the time is right." "Yes, Jack. Yes." They kissed again, longer this time, and Jack felt like his heart might burst from happiness. A week ago, he had been alone in the world, focused on nothing but work and saving money. Now he held in his arms a woman who saw him, truly saw him, and loved what she saw. It was more than he had ever dreamed possible. The next day, they returned to the lawyer's office for the hearing. Curtis was there with his bribed witnesses, his expression confident. But when Jack and Victoria presented their witnesses, respected members of the community, people who had known Margaret Jensen for years, Curtis's confidence began to crack. Reverend Stone spoke eloquently about Margaret's love for her niece. The neighbors provided specific details about letters Victoria had written, about gifts Margaret had received from Boston. One even remembered the name of the school where Victoria had taught, information she could only have known from Margaret herself. Curtis's witnesses, by contrast, were vague and contradictory under questioning. One could not even remember when he claimed to have met Margaret Jensen. Another contradicted himself about where the conversations had supposedly taken place. Mr. Hayes, the lawyer, was thorough in his examination. He questioned both parties extensively, reviewed documents, and listened carefully to all testimony. Finally, he called for a recess to make his determination. Jack and Victoria waited in the outer office, hands clasped, both too nervous to speak. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Hayes called them back in. "I have made my decision," he said, looking at both parties over his spectacles. "After reviewing all evidence and testimony, I find that Miss Victoria Jensen has established a credible claim to be the niece of the late Margaret Jensen. The testimony of multiple respected community members, combined with specific details that could only have come from personal correspondence, convinces me that her claim is genuine." Victoria gasped, squeezing Jack's hand so hard it hurt. "As for Mr. Curtis," Hayes continued, his voice taking on a steely edge, "I find your claim dubious at best and fraudulent at worst. Your witnesses lack credibility, and you have failed to produce the family Bible you claimed would prove your relationship. I am ruling in favor of Miss Jensen. The property and assets of Margaret Jensen's estate will be transferred to her as the rightful heir." Curtis shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is an outrage. I will appeal." You will leave my office," Hayes said firmly. "And if I hear that you have harassed Miss Jensen or attempted any further fraud, I will contact the territorial marshal. Am I understood?" Curtis glared at them all, then stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Victoria sagged in her chair, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said to Hayes. "Thank you so much. Thank your witnesses," Hayes said with a small smile. "And thank your young man here. Without his determination to find the truth, this might have gone very differently." Outside the lawyer's office, Victoria threw her arms around Jack, laughing and crying at the same time. "We did it. I cannot believe we did it." Jack held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. "You did it. You stood up for yourself. You fought for what was yours." "We did it together," Victoria corrected. She pulled back to look at him, her green eyes shining. "Everything we do from now on, we do together, if you still want that." "I want it more than anything," Jack said honestly. The house Victoria inherited from her aunt was a modest but well-built structure on the edge of Helena, with a small barn and 3 acres of land. It was not much, but it was a start. Victoria took Jack to see it that afternoon, and as they walked through the rooms, Jack could see the possibilities. "The roof needs some work," he said, examining the ceiling. "And that window frame is rotting, but the bones are good. It is a solid house." "My aunt lived here alone for 5 years," Victoria said, running her hand along the mantel above the fireplace. "It must have been lonely for her. I wish I had come sooner, that I had been braver about leaving my marriage earlier." "You came when you were ready," Jack said, "and your aunt would have understood that." Victoria turned to him. "Will you stay? I know you have your own plans, your own dreams of a ranch. But maybe we could start here, together." Jack had been thinking about this constantly since his conversation with the Mercers. His dream had always been a ranch near Boise, but dreams could change. Dreams could grow to include other people. "I have some money saved," he said slowly. "Enough to buy a small herd of cattle. With your land and my cattle, we could start a ranch right here. It would not be easy. We would have to work hard, maybe struggle for a while, but we could build something good." "I want to build something with you," Victoria said. "I do not care if it is hard. After everything I have been through, hard work with someone I love sounds like paradise." Over the next few weeks, Jack and Victoria fell into a routine. Jack took odd jobs around Helena to earn money, while Victoria cleaned and organized the house. They spent their evenings together, talking about their plans, getting to know each other more deeply. Jack learned that Victoria played piano beautifully, that she loved to read, that she had a quick wit and a tendency to become passionate about causes she believed in. He learned that she was brave in ways that had nothing to do with physical courage, the bravery to leave a bad situation, to start over, to let herself love again despite being hurt. Victoria learned that Jack was quieter than he first appeared, a man who thought deeply about things but did not often speak his thoughts aloud. She learned that he was kind to animals and children, that he kept his promises no matter the cost, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She learned that when he loved completely, with his whole heart. They courted properly, mindful of their reputations in the small community. Jack took Victoria to church socials and community dinners. They walked together through Helena's streets, always properly chaperoned by Mrs. Green or one of Victoria's new friends. But stolen moments alone, a touch of hands, a quick kiss when no one was watching made Jack's pulse race and deepened their connection. 3 months after they met, on a cold March evening, Jack proposed properly. He had saved up for a simple gold band, nothing fancy but solid and real. He got down on one knee in Victoria's parlor, with Mrs. Green and Reverend Stone as witnesses, and asked her to be his wife. "Victoria Jensen," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you are the bravest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You make me want to be better, to do better, to build a life worthy of you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face as she had on the day they first kissed. "Yes, Jack Sullivan, 1,000 times yes." They were married in April, when the snow had melted and the first green shoots were pushing through the earth. It was a small ceremony at Reverend Stone's church, attended by the friends they had made in Helena. Victoria wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Green had helped her sew, and Jack wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. As Jack slipped the ring onto Victoria's finger and kissed her for the first time as his wife, he thought back to that day in the blizzard. to finding her in the snow, to her whispered plea to leave her, to his firm response, "Never." It had been the most important decision of his life, that choice to save her, because in saving her, he had saved himself. He had found purpose, found love, found home in the green eyes of a woman who had taught him that sometimes the greatest adventures began with a single act of kindness. Their first year of marriage was not easy, but it was good. Jack bought a small herd of cattle with his savings, and they worked together to build up the ranch. Victoria proved to be stronger than she looked, willing to help with the physical labor of ranching even when it left her exhausted. She also took in students, teaching piano and reading to children in Helena, bringing in extra money and finding fulfillment in work she loved. Jack worked from sunup to sundown, building fences, tending cattle, making improvements to the property. But no matter how tired he was, he always made time for Victoria. They would sit together in the evenings, her head on his shoulder, planning for the future and marveling at how far they had come. That winter, their first Christmas as a married couple, Victoria gave Jack a gift that changed everything. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach, her eyes shining with joy and a little fear. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. "In June. Are you happy?" Happy did not begin to cover what Jack felt. He swept Victoria into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and told him to be careful. A baby. They were going to have a baby. The family he had lost when his parents died, the loneliness that had dogged him for years, all of it was being replaced with something better than he had ever imagined. Their son was born on a warm June evening in 1884, with Mrs. Green and a midwife in attendance. Jack paced outside the bedroom, his heart in his throat every time he heard Victoria cry out. But when the baby's wail finally pierced the air, healthy and strong, Jack felt tears stream down his face. Mrs. Green opened the door, smiling. "You have a son, Jack, and Victoria is asking for you." Jack entered the bedroom to find his wife propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with such love that it took his breath away. "Meet your son," she said, moving the blanket so Jack could see the baby's face. "I was thinking we could name him James, after your father." Jack sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at his son's tiny, perfect face. James had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they appeared to be blue like Victoria's mother's eyes had been, according to stories she had told. "James Sullivan," Jack said, testing the name. "It is perfect." He leaned down to kiss Victoria's forehead, then gently touched his son's cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, "for this, for everything, for taking a chance on a cowboy who found you in a storm." "Thank you for never leaving me," Victoria said, echoing that first conversation in the snow. "Even when I asked you to." As Jack sat with his wife and newborn son, listening to Mrs. Green bustle around the room and feeling the warm June breeze through the window, he thought about the journey that had brought them here. A blizzard, a dying woman in the snow, a decision to stop, to help, to stay. All of it had led to this moment, to this family, to this life that was richer and fuller than anything he had dreamed. The ranch grew over the years. By the time James was 5, they had tripled their herd and bought an additional 20 acres. Victoria had given birth to 2 more children, a daughter named Margaret after her aunt, and another son they named Thomas, after the rancher whose advice had helped Jack realize he was in love. Jack proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving with his children. He taught James to ride almost before the boy could walk. He read stories to Margaret every night, her favorite being tales of brave princesses who saved themselves. And baby Thomas, just learning to toddle around, followed Jack everywhere, his chubby legs working hard to keep up with his father. Victoria flourished as a mother and rancher's wife. She had found her place in the world, a place where her intelligence and independence were assets rather than liabilities. She served on the school board in Helena, advocated for better education for all children, and became known as someone who would fight for what was right. But her greatest joy was her family, Jack and their children, the life they had built together from nothing but determination and love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack took Victoria back to the line shack where they had spent that first night together. The children were with Mrs. Green, who doted on them like the grandmother they had never known. It was spring, and the Montana landscape was alive with wildflowers and new growth, nothing like the frozen wasteland it had been a decade earlier. They stood outside the small cabin, hand in hand, remembering. "I was so scared that night," Victoria said softly. "I thought I was going to die. I had given up. And I was terrified I would not be able to save you," Jack admitted. "When you told me to leave you, I felt this panic, like if I lost you, I would be losing something I did not even know I needed." Victoria turned to face him, reaching up to touch his bearded cheek. Gray was just beginning to show in his dark hair, and lines had formed around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. But to her, he was as handsome as the day she had first truly seen him in the firelight of this cabin. "You gave me everything," she said. "A home, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have. I love you, Jack Sullivan, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "I love you too," Jack said, pulling her close. "You are my home, Victoria. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." They kissed, long and deep, the kind of kiss that still made Victoria's heart race after 10 years of marriage. Then they went inside the cabin, which was dusty and unused but still standing, and spent the afternoon talking about their journey. About the blizzard that had brought them together, about the struggles and triumphs of building their ranch, about their children and the future they were creating. "You ever regret it?" Jack asked as they sat side by side on the old cot. "Staying in Montana instead of going back east? This life is harder than what you left behind." "Never," Victoria said firmly. "My life in Boston was comfortable but empty. Here I have purpose. I have love. I have you and our children. I would not trade this life for anything." Jack pulled her against his side, kissing the top of her head. "Good, because I plan to keep you for about 50 more years at least." "Only 50, Victoria teased. "Fine, 60, 70, forever, however long we have got." They stayed at the line shack until sunset, watching the light paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Then they rode back to their ranch, to their children, to the life they had built together. James grew up to be a fine rancher, taking over more of the daily operations as Jack aged. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind, a combination that served him well. Margaret became a teacher like her mother had been, opening a school in Helena that welcomed all children regardless of their ability to pay. Thomas, the youngest, inherited his parents' adventurous spirit and became a surveyor, mapping the growing territories of the West. All 3 children married and had families of their own, giving Jack and Victoria a houseful of grandchildren to spoil. The ranch became a gathering place for the growing Sullivan clan, a home base where everyone knew they were welcome and loved. As Jack and Victoria grew older, they spent more time in rocking chairs on their front porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once run. They held hands like young lovers, still finding comfort and joy in each other's presence after decades together. "Do you remember what you said to me that day in the snow?" Victoria asked one evening as they sat watching the sunset. She was 70 now, her dark hair turned silver, but her green eyes still sparkled with life. "When I told you to leave me." "I said never," Jack replied, his voice still strong despite his 73 years. "And I meant it. I never left you and I never will." "Not even when I am old and gray and cantankerous," Victoria teased. "You are already old and gray," Jack said with a grin. "And you have always been cantankerous, but you are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, still the love of my life, still the best decision I ever made." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "I love you, Jack Sullivan. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for saving me." "You saved me too," Jack said softly. "In every way a person can be saved." They sat together as the stars began to appear, surrounded by the sounds of their family inside the house, grandchildren laughing, their children talking, the clatter of dishes being washed after dinner. It was a good life, rich and full, built on a foundation of love that had started with a single act of compassion in a blizzard. Years passed, and Jack and Victoria remained devoted to each other until the very end. Jack passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, with Victoria holding his hand. She followed him 6 months later, unable to bear being without her other half for long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, their graves marked with simple stones that read, "Jack Sullivan, beloved husband and father, and Victoria Sullivan, beloved wife and mother." But their story did not end there. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the stories told around dinner tables and fireplaces. It lived on in the ranch that still stood, passed down through generations of Sullivans. It lived on in the lesson they had taught that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest act of kindness, with someone choosing to stop and help when they could have walked away. The tale of the cowboy who found a woman stranded in a blizzard, who refused to leave her even when she begged him to, became legend in Montana. It was a reminder that in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the American West, humanity and compassion could flourish. That love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. That a single decision, made in a moment of crisis, could change not just one life but generations of lives to come. And in the hearts of the Sullivan family, Jack and Victoria lived on forever, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together through determination and love, who had proved that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple word: never.